This is the video for Chapter 3 for the Story of Our Constitution. Make sure you're on page 47 in your Gateways textbook. In the middle of the page you can see the standards covered in this chapter, and at the bottom of this page you can see the terms that you should know. You need to make sure you really understand these vocabulary terms to be successful on the test for this chapter, but also for the test for the end of course exam. Make sure you have a pen, pencil, or highlighter ready, and turn to page 49 so we can begin this video. The top of page 49. The Articles of Confederation. After independence was declared, each colony became a separate and independent state. A state is a territory with its own government. Highlight that, or circle or underline. When the Second Continental Congress appointed a committee to draft the Declaration of Independence, it also appointed a second committee to decide how the 13 new states should cooperate. This committee drafted the Articles of Confederation. The Articles were debated for almost an entire year in the Continental Congress. They were sent to state legislatures. The Articles of Confederation were finally approved by all 13 states in 1781. A confederation is an association or an organization of separate states that cooperate together. So underline or highlight that. And what that means is a confederation is just a group of different states that all have their own governments, but they agree to work together. So they're going to work together, but they're going to be in charge of themselves. They're a confederation. The Articles of Confederation created a League of Friendship, to which all 13 states belonged. After their experiences with Great Britain, most Americans feared giving too much power to the central government. They did not want a remote authority taxing them or threatening their rights, as the British government had done. So the reason why they wanted to keep each state in charge of itself and just kind of work together instead of creating a government over them was because they were afraid that they're going to have a government just like they had with the King of Britain. The Articles of Confederation, therefore, left most government powers in the hands of the states. The Articles set up loose association in which the 13 states could cooperate, especially in dealing with foreign affairs, which are relations with other countries. Underline or highlight foreign affairs, relations with other countries. This association had a Congress, which was the only branch of the national government, and there was no national executive or national court system. So the first government we tried, the Articles of Confederation, that didn't work. It only had one branch, just a legislative branch. That's part of the reason why it didn't work. The Confederation Congress was actually a council made up of the representatives of 13 powerful, independent states. Each state had one vote in Congress.
Guided Note Question 1. You should have guided notes in front of you. Question 1 says, what are foreign affairs? Use the reading that we just covered to answer this question. You need to make sure you answer in a complete sentence, otherwise, I will not grade the answer. So what are foreign affairs? Look through the reading, find the answer, and write it down, and then move ahead with the video.
Provisions of the Articles of Confederation. Number 1. The new Confederation was to be known as the United States. It's pretty straightforward. We're going to work together. We're going to be called the United States. Number 2. Each state was to remain generally sovereign, to have final authority. Underline or highlight that. Sovereign means to have final authority. So the state's going to have the final say of what happens in its state. It's going to remain sovereign. It's not going to follow a bigger government. The states kept all governing powers except those few given exclusively to the Confederation Congress. The Congress of the Confederation was to meet every year, and each state would send 2 to 7 delegates to Congress. Each state delegation had one vote in Congress. All states, whatever their size, thus had equal representation. So it was set up this way so that all the states had the exact amount of representation, same amount of votes, and were treated equally. Congress was given the exclusive power to declare war, to exchange ambassadors with foreign states, to enter into treaties and alliances, to set weights and measurements, to resolve disputes between states, to establish post office, and to regulate relations with Indian tribes not found within one state. These powers could only be exercised by Congress and not by the states. So this new Congress they made under the Articles of Confederation had certain powers, and these powers were the exclusive powers, and I just listed them. So that's what that new government, the Articles of Confederation, can do. Everything else was being left to the individual states. Congress could also borrow money and build and equip a navy. Congress had the power to direct its own army, however, could not raise its own troops. These were contributed by the states. And all the expenses of the Confederation were paid from a general fund. State legislatures, turn the page, contributed to this fund. Congress could not directly tax citizens on its own. So they couldn't tax the people. Remember, they were mad about the king taxing. So they set up kind of like a bank account where the different states could send money if they wanted to pay for this new government. Number 9. The approval of 9 states was needed to pass any new law in Congress. And number 10. All 13 states had to agree to any changes in the Articles of Confederation. Individual state governments remained more powerful than the central government. For example, states could print their own money. They could tax goods bought from other states. Only the state governments could collect taxes and raise troops. The Congress of the Confederation relied on the contributions from the states to pay its expenses, yet had no power to force states to contribute. Each state government had its own executive courts, while the Confederation lacked both of these. Could such a government work? On the right-hand side, you now see the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. Number 1, Congress had no power to tax. So if you can't tax, you can't get money. Number 2, Congress had no power to raise its own troops. Number 3, Congress had no power to regulate trade. Number 4, Congress had no power to enforce its laws. Number 5, there was no national court system. And number 6, there was no national executive to provide central leadership. So there were a lot of weaknesses you can see with this system, which made it not be very effective, which caused the problems you're about to find out in the next part of the reading.
More guided note questions. For questions 2, 3, 4, and 5, you're going to use the information that you just read about from Provisions of the Articles of Confederation, starting on page 49 and continuing on to page 50. Question 2 is on page 49, item 2, at the bottom of the page. What does sovereign mean? Use it in a sentence. So write the definition for the word sovereign and also make sure you use it in a sentence. Question 3, under the Articles of Confederation, how many states does it take to pass any new laws? Number 4, to change the Articles of Confederation, how many states had to agree? And number 5, what were the 6 main reasons for why the Articles of Confederation were weak? You will find those 6 reasons on page 50 on the right-hand side, just below the picture up on the top right. America under the Articles of Confederation. Once the Articles of Confederation were approved in 1781, the Continental Congress was replaced by the Confederation Congress. These were critical years when it was unclear whether the former colonies would survive as independent, democratic states. The Confederation Congress had several major accomplishments. It negotiated the peace treaty with Great Britain that ended the American Revolution. It also created an orderly procedure for new territories to be admitted into the United States as states. During these years, the population of the United States expanded rapidly. Nevertheless, serious problems soon arose. First, there were problems with foreign nations. Turn the page. The British refused to abandon several of their forts in the Northwest despite the terms of the peace treaty ending the Revolutionary War. Spain challenged the borders of the new United States to the southwest. In faraway North Africa, pirates attacked American ships once protected by the British Navy. Without a strong national government, there was no one to watch over American interests. Then there were growing economic difficulties at home. Despite winning the Revolution, many Americans faced hard times to raise revenues. State taxed one another's goods. This hurt trade. There was a general shortage of money. Some state governments refused to honor their debts or to pay overseas creditors. The Confederation Congress lacked money, even though it owed back pay to veterans who fought in the American Revolution. A growing number of Americans believed that the state governments were becoming tyrannical and corrupt. Some state governments threatened freedom of religion. Others violated private property rights. George Washington feared that the jealousies and divisions of the states would prevent the development of a genuine national spirit. James Madison feared the tyranny of the majority, that state government would not respect the rights of the minorities, including property owners. So there were a lot of problems with this new government, since there was no United States, federal government that was kind of over the top of, in charge of all of the states. They were all just doing whatever they wanted. Some states would allow some rights, some would take away other rights. Some states would tax goods coming in from another state just because they didn't like them, so they'd make people there pay more. So they were having a lot of problems back and forth between all the states, and the people weren't happy. In Massachusetts, an economic crisis led the state government to raise taxes and increase its efforts to collect its debts. It foreclosed on farms, which means to take back ownership, so they're taking farms from the people and making them government land, and sent debtors to prison. Many of these struggling farmers had fought as soldiers in the Revolution. Poor farmers protested. Demonstrators shut down courts trying to collect taxes and debts. They demanded that Massachusetts print cheap paper money, as nearby Rhode Island had done. This would have raised prices and made the farmers' debts easier to repay. Daniel Shays, a Massachusetts farmer, had served as a captain during the American Revolution. Shays led a group of angry farmers and debtors who attacked one of the state's courthouses. They demanded freedom from debtors, cheap paper money, and lower taxes. Shays' rebellion created a wave of fear among wealthy landowners and merchants across the country. There was no national army to put down the rebellion, if Massachusetts had been unable to stop its spread. So Shay was a farmer. Before he was a farmer, he was a captain in the Revolutionary War for the Americans. After they won, they didn't need to have the big army anymore, so he went back to being a farmer, and he had to borrow money to get a farm going. Well, because the economy wasn't doing well, he wasn't making enough money to pay his debts, so the banks were taking all the land. All those debts that were owed were being taken from the people, and all these, what used to be soldiers are now farmers, were out of work and out of homes. So they were getting angry. So Shays led an attack to a courthouse, and by attacking the courthouse, he stopped the people from being able to go in and file to have those debtors have that land removed. If the judge wasn't able to stamp saying, okay, this Daniel Shays didn't pay his mortgage this month, you can take his land, and the judge would stamp it, and then they would have the deed to go do that. But since Daniel Shays attacked the courthouse, it stopped that from being able to happen. And then that got all the other states worried, because then they're wondering, well, what if, Daniel Shays' ideas start spreading around, and the Articles of Confederation, well, they have no army, so they're not able to stop anything like this from happening. So Daniel Shays was, showed the new government that it really wasn't strong enough to be able to lead and control these states. A call to revise the Articles. In the end, the Massachusetts militia, which is a citizens' military force, so the small army that Massachusetts had for itself, was able to crush Shays' rebellion, so they put an end to it. They stopped Shays and the other farmers. But with all the other problems facing the country under the Articles of Confederation, many Americans began to think that it was time for a change. Merchants feared the loss of trade, army officers feared the loss of their back pay, lenders feared the loss of their loans to the government. Turn the page. In 1786, a meeting was held in Annapolis, Maryland, to discuss trade between the states. 5 states sent representatives. The members called for the meeting to be held in Philadelphia the following year. Its purpose would be to revise the Articles of Confederation. All 13 states were invited to send representatives, so they decided it's time to meet in Philadelphia and to fix these Articles of Confederation. So they were all going to meet up, representatives from each one of the 13 states, and they were going to solve this problem. Guided Note Question 6. Who was Daniel Shays and why are we studying him? So explain who Daniel Shays was, and then explain why he's important or significant to American history and to the Articles of Confederation. So what was important about him? After you've done that, make sure you've put the definitions that you were supposed to on the front left-hand side of the Cornell Notes. Make sure you've answered the question on the front page at the bottom, down in the summary portion. And then if you have any questions yourself, on the back page of the Cornell Notes, on the left where it says questions, you would write the question there. Then, on the bottom of the back side of the Cornell Notes, there's a spot for the summary. Put a brief summary, 2 to 3 sentences, summarizing what we've gone over in this lesson. After you've done that, you've finished, and you've completed today's lesson.